Dominic Perrottet, New South Wales Premier, had the chance to talk to him a little bit earlier in the day. He remains tonight in the far north of New South Wales after the floods, and part of our promise to not forget that area is to keep talking about it. And I wanted to talk to him about some very specific things that need to be done and what we need to do into the future. So we've heard all the sorries, we've heard all the rest of it, so I wanted to begin by asking him what are his insights towards the end of the week as opposed to how it started.
Well, I think there's no doubt, Paul, that there are many people in the Northern Rivers, based on this freak event that's occurred here, have felt isolated and abandoned. But the overwhelming feel on the ground from the hundreds of people I've been speaking to over the last 10 days or so, Paul, has been very much that spirits are high. The courage, the passion of communities coming together has been overwhelming. And now that we're seeing a lot of the recovery centres set up, I was in Willumbar and Mullumbimby yesterday, and from a federal government level to a state government and council level, the coordination on the ground is very good. And that's the feedback I'm getting from many local community groups, local councils, local members, Labor and the Greens. So that's the real sense on the ground here. There's a mammoth task ahead of us, but look, they're devastating scenes, and anybody who has gone through this, Paul, would be incredibly emotional. And when people feel isolated and abandoned, as Premier, well, I would apologise for that, because I don't believe that anyone should feel that way. But my job right now as Premier is to get every one of our people up here back on their feet as quickly as possible.
Premier, let's get very practical, very minute, and let's talk about Lismore. It's built on a floodplain. It's flooded before. It'll flood again. So how do we make sure that it doesn't get damaged the same way that it did this time? Do we need to build more levees? Is there a bigger dam? Do we need to change the building laws?
Well, I think what we've got to do is get our planning teams in, Paul, and make sure as we rebuild Lismore, we do so in a way that protects it from floods before. We talk about these events being a 1 in 1,000 year or 1 in 500 year flood. We might have had a 14.5 metre flood in Lismore. 5 years ago, we had an over 10 metre flood. So the reality is we need to make sure that when this happens again, we don't have the damage and the destruction that we've seen. So I don't have the answers on that yet. I'm completely focused right now on the clean-up, getting people into homes, which could be up to about 25,000 people across the Northern Rivers, as well as getting financial support out there. But we are going to very quickly turn into the rebuild phase, and we need to do so in a way that, I guess, provides investment for flood mitigation. But there's only so much you can do that a 14.5 metre flood in order to stop a 14.5 metre flood. So we've got to rebuild in a way that keeps the community together but does so safely, and I'll be looking at that.
Now, when I was in Bateman's Bay, straight after the fires, there were a bunch of pop-up houses that were made available to people there. In the United States, their emergency organisation, FEMA, well, they do things like buy caravans and mobile homes. There are about 2,000 people who cannot go anywhere near their house because it has been destroyed. So where will they sleep for the next 2 weeks?
So today we've just announced the package with 50-50 funding with the Commonwealth Government, which will provide 16 weeks accommodation subsidies for people in the northern, particularly in the Northern Rivers. We're providing for single person homes around $6,000 payment up to $18,000 and beyond for larger families. But we've obviously also got a housing shortage in the Northern Rivers, so we're allowing those subsidies to be available anywhere in the country, and obviously many of these communities are on border towns. But to your question, Paul, so that's kind of the short-term situation. We have many people at the moment in emergency accommodation, and we have other people sitting who are sleeping in our evacuation hubs. So we need to transition as quickly as possible those people into temporary housing. We've also purchased a number of spots at many recreational facilities across the area. But then longer term, what we have to do is be fair dinkum about investing more in affordable housing so that and build that affordable housing in areas that are not flood prone. So I'm looking at the short term, the medium term and the long term as we move through this.
Now, as we know, local councils are a big part of all of this. They can be made up with great people, but also plenty of NIMBYs as well. So how do we make sure that an activist Greenie councillor or mayor can't stand in the way of what needs to be done to future flood-proof a city?
Well, I don't have the exact answer. We need to change the laws to that, Paul. But I think what I think we need to do is have greater connection between councils and the state government, and try and work together more to resolve these issues, particularly in relation to flood mitigation and also for fires, because we see the same kind of approach taken in certain council areas when it comes to not taking action, which would prevent substantive damage if a fire was to come. But I think we've got to have better engagement than we've had in the past. I think that's what the Lismore mayor's referring to there. But going forward, I would say that if we had better engagement, it would identify issues which we can't resolve, and then the government would need to step in and make a decision.
Good to talk to the New South Wales Premier. We'll continue to do so. Dominic Perrottet.